wrong what I acted, but what's my fear? Communicated. Well, ask Princess for waiting. You're on Jen and Matt.
Hey, Joseph.
What up, what up? I can't remember that song I had going earlier. My call off from work song.
And they do have a drink, like it's like a juice. It's not like this, but like a drink that you can drink, but it has that mother and all other kind of shit in it. Yeah, really, you should take it like a couple shots of this shit a week, just as a preventative action. You see, it's not full, so I do be using this shit, man. This shit ain't full, but I don't know, man. I've been doing good lately. I ain't been keeping up with my shit, you know. Now I'm fucking sick. Touching people germs and shit. Now I gotta double up all my fucking ginger. My ginger and garlic. My apple cider vinegar. I gotta double up on shit so I can get better.
Just get to the song, nigga. Damn, this motherfucker be talking his ass off, yo.
They say you need that shit like a couple times a week, bro. I know one dude, he say he just drank like a couple of old head. He's like, man, some strong ass.
Okay.
Shit just help Brandy, boy. That shit just. Motherfuckers been using shit like this for thousands of years. Natural remedies. All these pills and medications and vaccinations, all this shit new as fuck, yo. Motherfuckers been here for a long ass time, man. We just figured out like what herbs do what. That's
Can we get past that?
The Westerners want to take that shit and put it in pill form. Here, pop this. A little bit of lavender and chamomile. Grind that shit up. Put some hot water on it. Drink that shit. Then go to sleep. Throat kind of hurt. Got so dope, guys. I ain't gonna be doing too much singing and freestyling today. Psych, I'm lying. Cause I'm feeling sick. Ooh, might call off from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. Ooh, no, I'm not a jerk. Ooh, cause I'm feeling sick.
Ooh, might call off on work. Ooh,
stay home, play some games.
And blow up on this herb. Ooh, feeling kinda sick. Ooh, stay home from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. Ooh,
I can make it work.
ooh.
I'm feeling kinda sick. Sipping on an apple. Ooh.
Still feeling kind of sick, guys. This is not a good day.
Smoking on them herbs.
I've been asleep all day.
Might call off from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. Damn. The call-in song. I was thinking too, bro. We need to do like a fucking
That's me talking to Hater.
like an Instagram live, yo. I keep trying to figure out another way, like how can viewers see us both at the same time and be a part of the conversation. But if you can have your stream running, your YouTube channel, and I have my YouTube channel running, and then we on a dual stream on the Instagram shit, and see how that shit can get popping. And just come up with a topic or some shit, and, have a conversation about some shit, or just let the conversation flow like it normally does. Keep trying to figure out a way for us to get a fucking podcast going together.
I'm feeling kind of sick. Ooh, might call off from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. Ooh, and blow up on this herb. Ooh, might call off from work.
Ooh, stay home, play some games. Ooh,
And blow up on this herb. Ooh, feeling kind of sick. Ooh, might call off from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. Ooh, and blow up on this herb. Ooh, feeling kinda sick. Ooh, might call off from work. Ooh, stay home, play some games. And blow up on this herb. Cause your boy don't feel good, yo. Damn, I feel like shit right now. I ain't gonna lie to you about my fucking back killing me. I got body pains and aches and shit now. Fucking headache. Shit feel like a mild touch of the flu. But I did take some medicine earlier today, and then I just took like some NyQuil tablets. That shit need to kick in quick. Just quarantine myself off so I don't fucking pass this shit on to anybody else, yo. Hate feeling like this. Have next to no energy. Damn.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're here. We're actually.
Oh,
We're past our time.
We are past the time, but we saved a little extra. We're going a little over for you.
Okay. Well, anyway, you remember me on Joseph who talked about Bill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Atheists online, they make comments on that Bill video. Do you think that atheists, they can't read people correctly because they couldn't read me correctly. Nearly all of the atheists on the comment section said, Joe needs help. Joe needs professional help. I am a psychiatrist, and I am 100% certain that this guy needs to seek professional psychological help.
So whoever said that is probably a shitty psychiatrist or psychologist, because they shouldn't be engaged in that sort of diagnosis over an internet video. That said, I would suggest that. I don't necessarily disagree with them based on the content and the emotion of the last call. But today you were calling in to ask about near-death experiences.
Well, I do want to say something with that. I understand that it can hurt getting criticism for the content that you put out or something that you really poured your heart into. But sometimes it helps to take a step back and instead of saying, how could they say this about me, ask why. And learn that there may be a better form of communication to get your point across.
Well, I know that they've said things. I know that they've said things like, "Oh, there's so much distress in his voice. Oh, he's got some nervous laughter." Like, that's absolutely not true.
It's happening literally right now.
I had to take a step back real quick and went,
I mean,
oh boy. Okay.
Hang on, pause. I'm not trying to be mean to you or anything else. People are going to say mean things. Some are going to be right, some are going to be wrong. You can pay attention to them or not. But that particular thing is something that I noticed during the call, which is why Jenna and I backed off and reassessed things. And what everybody here in the studio and watching is, it literally happened as you were saying it. Now, that doesn't mean that you're broken and in need of psychotherapy or electric shock treatment or whatever else. It is a recognition of a trait that you have, which may or may not be a problem, but is, in people's experiences, symptomatic of something. And so maybe they're not necessarily trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be mean now. It's really happening right now. I'm acknowledging a fact. And, you can either not be aware of it, or maybe it's something that you're so used to that you don't see it the way that is what people were talking about, is what happened.
Right, and being mindful of, okay, this is something that I do, just be a little more mindful of it. Maybe the message won't come across the way that it has been.
But you don't got to change you.
Yeah, no.
What do you got?
What's up? So, what's up with today, Joe?
Yeah, so
I'm like a fucking mucus factory, yo. This shit is all in my head, all in the top of my chest and shit. Every time I cough, that shit coming up. My nose is... How you nose stuffy and runny at the same time? That shit don't make no sense. I can't breathe air in, but thick-ass liquid mucus can come out. What the hell? How is that even possible? That defies the laws of nature. Man, hate feeling like this. Shit, I can feel it, like all the fucking mucus and phlegm is just like sitting right here. That's why you gotta drink something strong to break that shit up, yo, so that shit can hack that shit out. Yo, and the NyQuil, the little NyQuil tablets I had got, yo, motherfucker carded me for that shit. And it wasn't like locked up or anything. It wasn't like locked behind a certain section or something. I just grabbed it off the shelf and went to the rest of his, like, oh, what's your birthday? I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, we got card you, but I can just put in your date, your birth date. I just told it to him, like, damn, for the goddamn medicine, this shit must be strong as shit, yo. That shit must be, he must be used that shit to make crystal meth. That motherfucker carded me for some over-the-counter shit. What's your birthday? I know I'm older than that motherfucker. I said, I was born in 81. Oh. You was born in the 90s.
my question is, why don't you just simply believe people who have near-death experiences?
I'm happy to believe that people are generally honestly conveying their understanding of an experience they have.
Right.
But that doesn't mean, and first of all, a near-death experience, it's not, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not remarkable, but I mean, there's been enough study in this and enough people claiming it. So when somebody claims a near-death experience, I'm happy to believe that they were near death.
Yes.
And that they experienced something. It's their story and their interpretation of the events that happened and what conclusions they reach from them that are possible. Just like when somebody tells me they were abducted by aliens, I don't believe they were actually abducted by aliens. I believe they had an experience, and that's the best explanation that they're able to come up with.
And it was a series of brain processes that could be translated into something spiritual or supernatural, that your brain was coping with this. Not so much that you actually were translated at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, well, I mean, because if you look at people who have near-death experiences, you watch their interviews, I mean, first of all, a lot of them corroborate one another, but...
No. So that's true for alien abductions as well?
Right. And that's very much, I mean, that can be counted as towards religion. We told one story and other people...
And some of them have admitted that...
And there you go. There's a really good rebuttal for that shit. It's like, oh, why don't you just believe people who say, yo, I almost fucking died and I saw some shit on the other side. Like, did you really see something? Okay, alien abductees. And you can watch these alien shows and all this. Yo, that should be convincing than a motherfucker. They implanted some probes in me, and I went to my doctor, and they removed these little metallic orbs from underneath my skin. I'm like, yo, how the fuck did that shit get there? What the hell is that? But do you really believe people who say, oh, they were abducted by aliens and went on some spaceship somewhere and was subjected to these weird ass experiments and testing? Not really. But then you'd be like, oh, miracles and Jesus and all this shit. Like, well, how do you know? How can you prove that?
Biden faked it.
Right.
And so if we know that people can be dishonest about it, and we know that people can be wrong about it, how do we tell when somebody's actually accurately describing what actually happened?
Well, I just think that, there have been so many near-death experiences that...
Do you think people are being abducted by aliens?
Yes
Didn't
or
we
no?
ask this last time?
I don't. I don't.
But there's been so many of
But
them.
there's been so many of them.
And they corroborate each other.
And yeah, the stories sound the same.
But you
So
won't
why don't
believe
you
that.
just believe them?
Yeah, why don't you believe that when all these alien abductees say the same thing
And
with the
I'm
same story?
skeptical when, for some reason, something that we have yet to understand, everybody seems to have the same story. Yeah, I'm going to be a little more skeptical of that. There's no variations.
Well, there's tons of variation.
Well, small ones, but nobody ever
They're
turned
not
around
even
and-
all about the same religious experience.
Right. But it's always the light at the end of the tunnel. It's not...
It's been a light at the end of the tunnel frequently since the first book about a light at the end of the tunnel was popular.
came out, right?
Just like the description of aliens have been almond head, almond big head, almond eyes.
Great people.
Since Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, aliens were
Little
robots
green
and
man.
furry things. Go back and look at, the Day of the Universe, or not the Day of the Universe.
Humanoids with black eyes.
The day the Earth stood still.
With black-eyed children.
Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, you look at the progression of aliens, it became canonized after Close Encounters.
Yeah.
And the near-death experiences became canonized after we started publishing stories about them and the media started reporting on them. And now, if you want your story to be taken seriously, it needs to fit within the canon. Otherwise, you're just a nut. So
Yeah.
if you say, I died on the table and was out for a minute and a half, and when they, while they were doing work on me, I traveled and I went to a land where there were fairies and dragons and leprechauns, and everything was this wonderful unicorn color, but everything tasted like poop. When you come back and you tell that story, nobody's going to take you seriously.
No.
But if you come back and tell a story about a light at the end of the tunnel and seeing loved ones and feeling peace and joy,
Warmth and yellow and all that.
or that you went to something that fits somebody's description of a hell or an afterlife that's common, all of a sudden people take you more seriously.
And that's what makes me skeptical about it, because it makes it very easy to lie about it.
But the other thing is,
Sorry, the template's already there.
you don't have to be lying. If you've been indoctrinated into a culture, this is the type of story that your brain will make up based on the information you already have. So how do I tell the difference between somebody who actually went to heaven and somebody who just thinks they went to heaven.
Whose brain was going through something extremely traumatic.
Doesn't matter what the brain was doing.
Well,
how do I tell the difference between somebody who actually went to heaven and somebody who thinks they went to heaven? I don't know either, Joseph, but thanks.
Thanks, sir.
A decade of your life, and just tell you this. There's basically 4 things you have to learn in life. 2020, a brand new decade.
2020, brand new decade. Let's give up the bullshit, man. Stick with the facts. Let's deal with reality. You know, we start this new decade off right.
Nice, because, you know, there's going to be a mix of calls, and yeah, there's a couple here that we're going to get to.
I'm picking number 6 just to piss you off.
You're picking 6 right now. I haven't even looked at what 6 is. We'll go to it. James in North Carolina. I'm getting an echo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious. I'm an atheist. I assume, by definition, you guys obviously favor science. I was wondering how you guys felt about scientists who are blackballed by the science community for having observations that aren't consistent with what would be considered socially acceptable nowadays. Specifically, James Watson, who discovered DNA.
Okay, so I think you're referring to some of the social gaffes that he has made about certain groups of people, particularly women. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about his observations on race.
Okay, so he's.
Who are we talking about? Watson
Watson and Crick.
Yeah. So I just wanted to double check, because there are others who have similar observations.
Right. So his work is instrumental to our understanding of molecular biology and genetics, and it will go down, and it's still a fundamental aspect of learning for any person studying the topic. But him being regarded as someone of merit only extends to his academic achievements. And so if he's saying crazy shit that is not scientific, then guess what? You're going to be
You're
relegated.
saying that it's not scientific what he said about the differences between races.
They're like, specifically what?
Well, that there's differences whatsoever.
Yeah, there's differences between people, right? But the conclusions that some people try to draw as far as the biology of races only goes so far, right? Because I could say there's a difference between me and my brothers, right? But if you're trying to group it together, all African Americans, well, that's erroneous, right? Because we're not one homogenous group.
The grouping, the process of deciding who fits into what particular category, is where I think.
And who determines that?
Well,
Genetics.
but we can define things however we want. We can say, okay, we're only going to look at people with beards, or who can grow a full beard. And I'm looking at a wonderful full beard out in the audience that, you know, puts mine to shame, because mine will only get maybe 2 inches longer than this, and it's done.
It's Santa Claus.
So we draw that circle, and then we can discuss what things they have in common and what things they don't have in common. And so obviously I'm sitting here with drag, and there's a difference in melanin in our skin.
Right.
There's a difference in hair type. And so you could draw us in 2 different circles and talk about those things and who we have more in common with. But it's also easy to put us in the same circle as males in the, I'm assuming, in the 21st century, trace our genetic heritage back and find out where we have differences. And if we are 99% identical, 99.9967324, I think it is.
Close enough.
I'm just making that number up. The point is that even if you were to find, let's say we were going to say women are smarter than men. Just we've figured it out. Women are just generally smarter than men. So what? Because the difference that we're talking about there, if there were to be one, isn't particularly significant and doesn't enlighten us on anything. So I'm not familiar with what Watson said with regard to race. I'm probably heard about it at some point. Oh, we lost the caller. No wonder I'm not getting interrupted.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Do you know what he said?
Yeah, I know what he's talking about. There was actually my seminar in biology course went over some of those things, and I particularly remember some statements about Photo 51, and I just forgot her name too. Doggone it, someone knows what I'm talking about, but they went in on this woman, and she was not fairly characterized as far as her demeanor, and people didn't want to work with her because of their perception that she's ice queen, this, that, and the other. But I mean, this is 60 something years ago almost. So
Sure.
you know that sort of stuff. Looking back, you know what? That's not acceptable. It's not professional, and that should have no place in any business or any lab or whatever. And so folks are upset because they feel that this guy or that guy should not be looked down upon because he has this particular view. Which, granted, I kind of see the point that just because someone disagrees with you, but when some of these views are actually harmful to society and they're just generalizations and they're not actually reflective of reality, then guess what? You know what? Not all your beliefs everyone's going to be cool with.
Yeah, I mean, he called in to say that I'm discounting, science.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. If he didn't understand that group white guys are not a homogenous group. African Americans are not a homogenous group. If he doesn't know that, he might want to go back to biology class.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, and I don't think this will catch anybody particularly by surprise. I am fine with discussing things within the context in which they are currently being discussed. So, for example, I'm fine with the notion that race is predominantly a social construct, that the things that unite us are far greater than the things that divide us, and the distinctions we're talking about, how much melanin in somebody's skin or what your particular lineage is. It's incredibly difficult. It's not all African Americans a homogenous group, but all people with a certain skin tone aren't even a homogenous group. They're from all over everything else. And what people want to do is we want to be lazy. We want to be able to take anybody and anything and put them into a convenient bucket so that we can pretend that we understand the sum total of what makes them them. And so it's very easy to say, hey, I watched the Atheist Experience today, and there was a white guy on with a black guy. Because that's the buckets we want to put people into.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to dismiss people. It allows us to pretend like we know and understand people. I'm not going to do the absolutely monumentally ignorant thing of saying, I don't see race. Anthony Penn will clarify that over and over again.
Do not say that, people.
You absolutely do see race. It's absurd. You see differences between people. It's when you go through those classifications, how you want to use them and what conclusions you reach, that's where the problem is. Because if there's anybody out there who thinks that I'm not eclipsed on scientific knowledge sitting here today, you not only need to go back to biology class, you should probably just stop talking for a while and read a few dozen books.
An epic new documentary that explores a special bond between humans
a valued customer. I like that thing.
Ooh, going valued customer in the Midwest. Thank you, valued customer. How can we help you today?
Hey, Matt. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, I was just calling in today. It's the first time I called in. But we are closeted atheists here in a community that we would not be able to come out in.
Sure.
And so my wife and I were the same, kind of on the same journey. But we are raising our kids in the church. And sorry, I'm a little bit nervous here.
You don't have to be nervous, and I've answered this issue 100 times, so I'm going to let Drag do it.
Yeah. So we're raising them in the church, but now that they're getting older, I'm having, my son, 8 and 5, we're kind of having a fear that they're going to kind of
phone you love. Well, the real phone you love, with a little help from Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
Do you want to learn to draw professional and impressive artwork from scratch that will blow people's minds?
This test spacecraft promises to reveal an entire host of new, close exoplanets. And in fact, it already has. My guests today have found an intriguing new exoplanet just about 100 light years away that looks a lot like Earth. TOI 700 orbits a red dwarf within its habitable zone, and maybe, just maybe, might host the conditions right for life.
Welcome to Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. In today's episode, John is joined by Dr. Andrew Vanderberg and Dr. Joey Rodriguez. Dr. Vanderberg received his PhD in astronomy at Harvard University in 2017 and was a postdoctoral associate at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics until he started his Sagan Fellowship at the University of Texas in Austin. His research focuses on extrasolar planet detection, in particular studying the Kepler Space Telescope data. Dr. Rodriguez works as a Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory astronomer at the Center for Astrophysics for Harvard-Smithsonian. His research focuses on understanding how planets form and evolve by studying circumstellar disks and exoplanets. He received his PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University in 2016.
Andrew Vanderberg and Joey Rodriguez, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Now, gentlemen, you have found what appears to be a very Earth-like planet orbiting a red dwarf. How Earth-like are we talking? I mean, obviously this is not an analog of the sun. It's a red dwarf. But other than that, what does this planet look like in comparison to Earth from what you can tell so far?
So the planet is roughly about 20% larger than the Earth, and it receives about 85% of the flux that the Earth would receive from the sun. So right now all we know about it is that it's roughly the size of Earth, and it resides right inside the habitable zone for this star. Other than that, we don't know what the mass of the planet is, and that's actually going to be the focus of future studies.
Now, this was discovered by TESS, which is our new planet-haunting transit searching instrument, replacing previous instruments like the Kepler Space Telescope. So, what exactly, how distant is this star system from us? I know TESS tends to look closer in. How far away is this?
So it's about 100 light years, 31 parsecs. So it's relatively nearby, much closer than a lot of the planets that were found in previous missions. And as you pointed out, that is really the focus of the TESS mission.
So it's within the habitable zone of this red dwarf, which, being a red dwarf, that would imply that it's very close into this star. There's been some question over the last few years that red dwarfs might not be ideal. They might be bathing their habitable zones in ultraviolet light and things like that that might really preclude the possibility of water and, you know, even possibly life. Is this the case with this planet? Is this a rambunctious young red dwarf, or is it something a little bit more quiescent?
So this star is a little bit older and therefore seems to be pretty quiet right now. The TESS light curve doesn't show any evidence for variability due to star spots, although some ground-based light curves show that there might be star spots and that the star might be rotating with an orbital period of about 55 days. And we don't see any flares during the full year light curve that we had from TESS. So this looks to be a quieter star than, say, for example, TRAPPIST-1.
Now, this planet would likely be tidally locked, right?
That's correct.
So we're probably would be looking, if habitable, it would be an eyeball world. It would have, a side that never sees the light of day, so to speak, and then a side that always sees it, and then a twilight zone.
That's correct.
Where you might have something interesting, right?
Yeah, so that's the focus of the third paper in our series, led by Gabby Engelman-Suiza. So she simulated the climate on this planet and found that indeed there are situations where you have a lot of clouds building up near the substellar point, the point closest to the star, and then some temperature gradients. The temperature goes from very hot near that substellar point to cooler as you go away from the starlight. And potentially there are some hospitable places to live if this is a rocky world with a potentially habitable atmosphere.
Now, your paper details that it does have some characteristics that it might be a rocky world. What tells you that it might be that?
So most of what we know in the sense of assuming that it's likely rocky has to do with what we know from previous studies, which focused on planets around small red dwarfs like TOI 700 and found that planets that are the similar size to what we found for TOI 700d are indeed rocky compositions. However, that study was only focused on planets that were very close to their star within their habitable zones. And so we don't actually know what we'll find for a planet, in its habitable zone, whether that trend will continue. But based on what we know from those studies, it's likely that this planet is rocky.
Yeah, we have to extrapolate the results from these studies of hotter planets if we want to make any guesses about whether these cooler, potentially habitable planets are rocky or not. And whenever you extrapolate, there's a possibility that you're just doing it totally wrong. So that's the uncertainty of whether the planet is rocky or not.
How similar is this to some of the other things we found, like the TRAPPIST-1 system and Proxima b for that matter? Is this sort of in that class, or is this something even more special than what those appear to be?
So TRAPPIST-1 and Proxima are both lower mass stars than TOI 700. TRAPPIST-1, of course, is extremely low mass. It has a mass about 8% that of the Sun. Proxima is a little bit higher mass. It has a mass about 15% that of the Sun. TOI 700 has a mass that's about 42% the mass of the Sun. So the star is much bigger, and the planets are further away from the star. Those other two stars, TRAPPIST-1 and Proxima, are also more active right now than TOI 700 is. So potentially this could be, right now, a more hospitable place for life as we know it. But on the other hand, it's possible that earlier on in its lifetime, TOI 700 was also more active, like these other lower mass stars.
So this system, this star itself, is a little bit more substantial than a lot of red dwarfs, right? So it's sort of on the more hefty side of things.
That's right.
Now, does that make... Now, you say it's a calm star. Early in its history, would it have been a calm star? Because I know the evolution of red dwarfs, they tend to be a little bit dicey, and then they sort of quiet down. How old is this star system and this planet? Do you have any ideas on that?
So that was actually part of the paper one that was led by Emily Gilbert from the University of Chicago. And what they figured out was that the star has to be older than about 1.5 gigayears. But that's all the constraint that they were able to put on at this point.
It's notoriously difficult to measure the ages of old stars. If it's a young star, you can actually do pretty well, younger than about a gigayear. But for the old stars, they just don't change very much at all over the many gigayears of their lifetimes.
Which in the case of a red dwarf is a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
So 1.5 billion years at least, right?
That's correct.
That's interesting because if it's older than that, that's enough time to maybe have microbial life going on this planet if there's liquid water there. What stands in the way of that? Is there anything obvious that says, well, this is Earth-like, but we shouldn't really speculate about life because it has this problem or that problem? Is there anything that stands out that might say liquid water is sort of precluded from being here, or is it completely possible that it's there?
As far as we know, it's completely possible. This is, of course, barring our earlier comments about the potentially more active history of the star in terms of flares and ultraviolet radiation, and also just the fact that we really don't yet know that much about whether it is in fact rocky. We think it could be, but we need to test that to be sure, and we don't know what its atmosphere looked like. So If we knew all the details, our answer might be totally different. But from where we are standing right now, with our best knowledge, as far as we can tell, this is a potential candidate to host life.
So we should look at it. And when telescopes like James Webb come online, we should start looking for atmospheric biosignatures. Now, to my understanding, is some modeling of what the atmosphere might be like with this world has been done. Give us some idea of what came out of that. What could the atmosphere of this world be like so far as we know at this point?
So there's a lot of assumptions that have to go into this, obviously. What that study really showed was that you could explore various different types of Earths. So an Earth with, say, no water, like similar to present day, but just no water. You could have an early Mars-type planet. But unfortunately, in all of the cases, the detectability of the atmosphere signatures are just not feasible in the era of the James Webb Space Telescope. And that was kind of one of the big conclusions out of the paper.
Now, is there anything planned that might be better in the future?
So there are 4 mission concepts under study right now for the next generation of space telescopes after the James Webb Telescope launches, after the WFIRST mission launches. And one of those concepts is like a super James Webb. It's called the Origin Space Telescope, and it also observes in the infrared. And depending on what the specs of that telescope end up becoming and what the capabilities end up being, it's plausible that that telescope could make progress even where James Webb could not.
Now, how hard is it to separate out the red dwarf from the planet? If you're looking at trying to look at the atmosphere and you're trying to say this is from that planet versus emissions, separating it from the emissions of the star itself, how hard is that, characterizing an atmosphere on a planet on a world like this?
So it's particularly difficult for a world like this where the signals are small. So for giant planets, we've been able to do this over the past decade or so and do it quite well. But for systems where the signal is quite small, it's actually quite difficult. But the way that we do it is that we actually take spectra at various times throughout the planet's orbit. Specifically, we take it when the planet is in front of the host star and it's actually transiting, so all the light that is going through is also passing through the atmosphere of the planet. And then we also take a spectra when the planet is not in front of it, when it's in a different place in its orbit, and we can actually take the difference between those two, and that will actually give us the amount of the light that's actually going through the atmosphere, and we can try to see those small features from the atmosphere of the planet.
But for this system, it's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
We're talking about measuring features on scales of 1 to 10 parts per million, which is orders of magnitude beyond what we can do right now, and is still beyond what James Webb will be able to do.
Now, this planet is transiting. What can you tell from other things like radial velocity measurements? Can you sort of constrain things down for this planet as far as mass to further observation, or do you have it?
So that is, the big thing that we want to do going forward. So this target, while it's not well suited for studies of its atmosphere at this time, it's actually fairly well suited to try to go out and measure the mass of the planets using radial velocity measurements, using the state-of-the-art facilities that are currently coming online or just recently came online. But it will be a very difficult measurement. We are talking about 80 centimeters per second is the actual amplitude of the orbit for this planet. And many of the planets that we have gotten masses for have a few meter per second at the smallest amplitude, with maybe a meter per second being the smallest. So it's going to be a very challenging observation, but of the habitable zone Earth-sized planets known to date, it's actually the best one for this mass measurement.
And it's a really important measurement for us to make, because you listen to us tell you how we just don't know whether Earth-sized planets in their star's habitable zones are usually rocky. That seems like, something we should know, right? If we want to be looking for these planets and we want to be looking for life, we should really understand whether these planets are anything like the Earth at all. So we're really excited to have the opportunity to make one of the first measurements of this type on this planet.
Yes, now, and to make that measurement, it's not just a measurement, it's confirmed, because you also looked at this with the Spitzer Space Telescope. What did you look for with that? I mean, what did that confirm? Or did you learn anything more than you knew from TESS just from that confirmation?
So in the first paper, they were able to statistically validate the planetary nature of TOI 700D. And so one of the things that that validation process does not take into account is systematics from the instrument itself. And it kind of assumes that it has to be an astrophysical signal that you're seeing. So we are still learning about the systematics in the TESS telescope and the data itself. And so what Spitzer, one of the big things it really allowed us to do was to independently confirm the transit and completely rule out any systematics as being the origin of the transit in the TESS data. The other thing it allows us to do is it actually really allowed us to refine the confidence in the parameters for TOI 700D. Specifically, we get a tighter constraint on what the radius of the planet is and a tighter constraint on what the period of the planet is, our confidence in those two parameters.
Now, gut feelings, gentlemen, and I want to hear from both of you. Is this the closest planet we have yet found to Earth?
That's a tough question.
Andrew, you first. Can we say this is the closest we've gotten as far as spotting another Earth, or something that recognizably similar to Earth?
In terms of the things we know, we can measure the temperature of the planet or estimate the temperature of the planet. We can measure the size of the planet, and we can study the star itself. There are other planets that are probably more similar to Earth in one of those dimensions or the other. For example, the TRAPPIST-1 planets are in general smaller and closer to exactly one Earth radius. So you might say that those are more Earth-like, but their star is a little bit more different from the Sun. On the other hand, there are stars from the Kepler mission that have been found to have small planets in their habitable zones, like Kepler-62. That star is higher mass than TOI 700 and closer mass to the Sun. So perhaps you might want to say that that planet is more Earth-like than TOI 700. But I think it's fair to say that TOI 700, as far as we can tell, is pretty close to Earth in all of these dimensions. Given our lack of knowledge about the mass of the planet, its actual composition, and its atmosphere so far.
Joey, your view?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew really put it particularly well there. There are certain aspects of TOI 700D that are very, very similar to the Earth, but then there are other known habitable zone Earth-sized planets that have aspects that are much more similar to the Sun-Earth system. So I think the key point here is that this is the most accessible to get that mass measurement. But in terms of the similarity to the Earth-Sun, I think there are enough differences that we just don't know at this stage. I know it's probably not the greatest answer, but
when we have that mass measurement, I'm sorry, Joey, talking over you. When we have that mass measurement, we'll be able to say more.
Yeah, because that'll allow us to get the bulk composition and let us compare it to what we know for, say, the terrestrial planets in our solar system.
I see. Now, my last question for you guys. TESS, okay. Almost brand new instrument in space. It's already showing plenty of results. What are the prospects for finding an Earth-like planet around a different type of star, say an orange dwarf or a sun-like star? Is this that we see with these red dwarfs, which also with TRAPPIST-1 and Proxima b, but can we look closer? Is it possible to actually spot an Earth-like planet in the habitable zone of a type G star with that instrument?
I think that depends how long NASA lets us keep flying TESS. So right now, TESS has gone about 75% of its primary mission. It will switch over into its first extended mission in July, and we'll start observing the southern hemisphere again. And that's really important for finding planets in the habitable zones of higher mass stars, because the higher mass your star, the longer the orbital period is for a planet in the habitable zone. If you want to find a planet in the habitable zone of a sun-like star, you have to wait a year between each transit. And since we've only observed all of the stars in one part of the sky for a year at most, there's no way we could find enough transits for us to actually detect such a planet yet. But if we keep getting extended missions approved and continue collecting more and more data on these stars, then I think it's entirely possible that we'll start finding planets in the habitable zones of higher mass stars.
And I mean, just to add to that, you know, we typically want 3 transits before we declare this a candidate or a confirmation or anything. And so that means we need at least 3 years of data to look for an Earth-sized planet around a sun-like star.
So in essence, anyone that might be 100 light years out with a test spacecraft that doesn't observe for longer than a year is never going to see Earth.
They would have to get very, 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 very lucky.
Unless they got very lucky. Yes.
But it's very unlikely. I think they would have to, they would not happen.
It'll be challenging too, though, because we'll have big gaps in our data. Because TESS will look at the southern hemisphere, then it is now looking at the northern hemisphere. So we're not observing TOI 700 right now. We're observing stars on the other side of the sky.
Right.
So when we go back to TOI 700 and the stars in that region, we will have missed an entire year. So it's possible we might have missed a transit of a planet with a period of 1 year. So that's another wrinkle you have to throw in. Do you actually know the period well? Could the period, if you find 2 transits separated by 2 years, is the period 2 years or is the period 1 year? So that's another wrinkle you have to take care of and think about. So TESS is a little bit tricky to do this, but we think that there's a chance it could be done.
Now, can you detect, say TESS is looking in the wrong direction and you expect a transit coming? Can you use ground-based telescopes to detect the transit?
For TOI 700D, for the Earth-sized habitable zone planet, no. The signal is just too shallow to really do from the ground. But we were actually able to get ground-based transit follow-up of the middle planet in the system, which is more of a mini version of Neptune, most likely.
Now, how many planets do you know of total in the system?
So we know of 3 planets. One's orbiting at 10 days, and it's an Earth-sized planet. That's roughly 1.04 Earth radii. We know of a sub-Neptune, which is 2.6 Earth radii. That's about a 16-day period. And then, of course, we know about the habitable zone Earth-sized planet TOI 700D, which is at 37.5 days.
Such short years for these planets so close in to red dwarfs. Well, gentlemen, we are out of time, and it was a pleasure talking to you both, and I hope we learn more about this planet.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for watching Event Horizon. If you're new to our show, hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
NASA's TESS mission has found its first Earth-sized world in its star's habitable zone.
Share abroad at no extra charge with everyone back home in this. With a little help from Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read.
Google Fi, a phone plan by Google. If a winter traveler made a phone plan, he could share all of this with everyone back home in this. Get high. by Google. If these sports fans made a phone plan,
oh my God,
they could stream all the games they. Google Fi, a phone plan by Google. If a bunch of babies made a phone plan, it would work on their favorite. Games with unlimited data for as low as $45 per line, with a little help from Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
Apology, liberty.
That was great.
Well, at least one of us was.
Baffled by this conflicting evidence. His prints are all over the crime scene. The TV footage puts him 60 miles.
So special.
Without a college degree, I was just fighting an uphill battle. I found Google's IT support program. I finished the program in
This technology is predicted to become the biggest tech investment of 2020, and it's all because of 5G.
Alright, I'm out of here.